Hi, my name is Reagan. Welcome to the Twisted States podcast. Thank you for joining us for episode 24 of Twisted States, where each episode we take a look state by state at some of America's most nefarious killers, elusive cryptids, and bizarre mysteries. In this episode, we'll be heading to Tennessee to learn about a very infamous case in American folklore, the Bell Witch haunting. So the Bell Witch is a treasured piece of Southern folklore centered around the Bell family and this invisible entity that upended their lives in the Red River Valley, Tennessee, spanning from 1817 to 1821. Newspaper editor Martin V. Ingram published his authenticated history of the Bell Witch in 1894. So the Bell family consisted of John Bell Sr., born in 1750 in North Carolina. His wife, Lucy Bell, was born in 1770, and the two were married in 1786. And altogether, over the span of their marriage, they had 9 children. John, having established himself quite well as a successful farmer in North Carolina, decided that he wanted to go out and, do the thing. He packed up his family, and they relocated to Tennessee. I guess there was just a lot of opportunity at the time, apparently, in Tennessee. Now, once again, just like most of these things, and especially something from like this long ago in this era, you get a lot of like mixed information and stuff, of course, right? So, part of that being, some people say that the reason why he did pick up his family and move so far was because it was some kind of a controversy, some kind of an issue that he got into. But who knows? I couldn't find any yay or nay information on that, basically. But it is, in some accounts, there's some kind of like, leanings toward that kind of being a thing. So they made their way through the ridiculously rough terrain, especially at the time, without like vehicles, a car. I mean, they had vehicles, they had wagons, horses and wagons. But he made his way through the terrain of the Blue Ridge Mountains and settled in the Red River Valley near what is now Adams, Tennessee, in 1804. Bell purchased some land. Altogether, by the time he got to the point where he was basically, by the time he stopped, he had 328 acres of land and had a large house for his family. He had several fields cleared for planting, and he integrated himself pretty well into the local community. He was an elder at the Red River Baptist Church. Life was good. They were settled in. They were doing their thing. It was great. As many farm owners in the area did at that time, he did own slaves that worked the land for and with him. So, chalk it up to his position in the community, or maybe the guy just was kind of shit, whatever, who knows? Maybe he wasn't the best guy, but he did have somebody that he did have some problems with. He had a neighbor who was somebody he did some land dealings with, and her name was Kate Batts. She accused him of some shady practices and a bad land deal. Apparently, he had allegedly leased some of his land out to her to work and farm. And it was a financially predatory situation. So basically, her crops weren't yielding enough money to make her leasing the land from him, fruitful, right? So it came to a head at the point where she actually went to the church elders and had them, brought them in on it to kind of settle the case. So, which was something that was done pretty often back then. There really wasn't as much of a division between the church and the law, basically, In some recallings, this bad deal actually caused John Bell Sr. to be excommunicated from the local Baptist church. I don't know if that's so or not, but like I said, in some retellings, that's what's been said. So one morning in 1817, John Bell Sr. was out checking his cornfields and spotted an absurd-looking creature with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Of course, John did what most people would have done in that era. He fired his gun at it several times, ultimately missing, and it ran away. So shortly after that, one of John's sons would be out in the fields or whatever, and he would see a large, like turkey-sized bird perched on a fence, but it was unlike anything that he had ever seen before. So it's kind of weird. They were both seeing like these strange creatures mucking about, whatever. The same evening that John saw this strange dog, he sat down with his family for dinner, and that was the evening that their nightmare began. That was the start of the end and what would ultimately be the demise of John Bell. As they were sitting down for their meal, they started hearing knocking outside on the outside walls of the house, and Niels was like, "Oh, who's playing a prank? Whatever." So he, him and his sons tried to go out and catch who was doing it, and to no avail. So then he had some of his farm hands also help try to find out who the perpetrator was, and they were never able to catch anybody in the act. They had no luck. Eventually, this escalated into them actually hearing knocking and scraping and banging and weird noises inside their home, which that's got to be pretty crazy and pretty scary. I mean, because this was like the olden times as far as like technology and stuff went, so it's not like you can go get some cameras and throw them up and see what's going on, right? At night it's dark and they're living by like gaslight and candlelight, oil lamps and things, so it would have been pretty creepy, I would think, to have a bunch of like weird noises happening around your house and your property. And yikes. So the following year, in 1818, the paranormal activities would escalate to the point of physical attacks. Sounds of gnawing on bedposts being heard by the children, pinches, hair pulling, and the feeling of being stuck by pins. Objects would fly through the air. There was just constant turmoil. Like there was just constantly something going on. Basically just no peace in the house, right? At one point, the entity started to communicate verbally with the family, speaking in many different tones and voices. The word was starting to spread about the phenomenon, and with no other ideas, the family started bringing in neighbors and friends to let them experience the madness for themselves. Like, we're going through some things. You gotta come check this out, And people were coming to stay and try to witness this themselves. So, he's like, yeah, okay, whatever. Sure, you've got ghosts or a poltergeist or whatever, something, people wanted to see. And then people were just curious, they would see these things themselves, or hear these things, I guess I should say. Bell would refer to herself as Kate Batts at some point, and would mimic family members of visitors, contributing to the unsettling nature of the haunting. The witch seemed to know things that should have not been known, and was reported to have recited church sermons happening several miles away as they were happening. The strangest part of this is that Kate Batts was no ghost or witch, and was still very much alive. There was no peace to be had whatsoever at this point. It was insane. And the entity became furious with Betsy over her engagement to a young boy that lived nearby named Joshua Gardner, demanding she break things off with him. This point was later brought up when some skeptics suggested that one of Betsy Bell's teachers may have had some kind of hand in the haunting, as he had an interest in Betsy and was a well-practiced ventriloquist. Strangely enough, the entity was usually fairly nice to John's wife Lucy, and generally not too bad directly to the children, but despised John, referring to him as Old Jack, and would threaten his life. By 1819, there was a great physical toll taken due to all of this. John Bell's health had deteriorated considerably at this point. He was suffering from paralysis in his mouth and face. He was fully convinced that he had been cursed by the Bell Witch. This was before the discovery and naming of Bell's palsy, but basically the symptoms Bell was experiencing were closely related to, it seems like, to that disease. There's no correlation between the two, like between the naming of Bell's palsy and John Bell, but he had a lot of the same like symptoms. And Bell's palsy is just like a infection on the nerve, like on your face, that can cause like stroke-like symptoms. So in 1820, John finally succumbed to whatever ailment he was suffering from. He slipped into a coma and died the next day. Considering he was in his 70s by this point, which was a rather advanced age at the time, he might have passed from natural causes. Reportedly, though, the Bell Witch claimed she poisoned him. There was even a bottle of a strange substance found in the home that was considered to possibly be the poison that killed John. There were reports that the substance was given to an animal that passed away shortly after ingesting it. It was also reported that it was just thrown into the fire shortly after being located, and that it burned with a blue flame. So at John's funeral, it said that the Bell Witch was singing inappropriate songs to further taunt the Bell family. The haunting continued for a short time after his passing. Then at one point, the witch said she would return in 7 years, and all the haunting stopped. 7 years later, she did show back up, but with not as much attention as before the haunting. It didn't last long. It just kind of a little flash in the pan thing, right? So ultimately, there's no concrete evidence that any of this was real or caused by a supernatural entity. All we have is a ton of conflicting historical accounts and testimonies from an era where there was a lot of fear and superstition. With so many years spanning between the publication of the first book on this matter, it's even that much more difficult to verify many of the claims, since most anyone that could have authenticated any of it has long since passed. A lot of people came from all over the place to investigate this case, but ultimately the source of all these happenings is still considered a great mystery. So what I've discussed here is a rough idea of all the goings-on at the Bell Farm in the early 1800s, and only the tip of the iceberg. There are endless accounts, as I mentioned before, and they're all varied with some pretty crazy variants in the story, even including a supposed visit from Andrew Jackson at the Bell Farm. One main running theme is the notion that many believe it was truly supernatural. I did find a few references to people believing the voice of the witch could be attributed to Bell's daughter Elizabeth Betsy Bell. She would have been 11 years old when the phenomenon started. But many discuss this, considering her too young to be able to learn such advanced ventriloquism and pull off much of what the entity did. But that's what I'd put my money on, or maybe it was something that she had help with. We can never truly know what happened, but it has for sure left quite a legacy of amazing Southern folklore behind. The Bell Witch continues to be celebrated with tons of books, movies, and even songs and poems telling the tale. The region has embraced this folklore with a museum, festivals, and many in-depth books by local historians into the lore of the Bell Witch. The Bell Witch continues to live on as a tale of great historical relevance, considered one of the most well-known American hauntings, and the death of John Bell is considered by many to be the only case of death by supernatural spirits in history. The conflicting accounts only serve to fuel the curiosity of what really happened at that farm all of those years ago. Humanity will always have a fascination with the supernatural, powers of suggestion, the afterlife, and things that go bump in the night. Folktales like this one have truly left their mark on history and will likely serve to fascinate and entertain many generations to come. There's no question that something was happening during those 3 years so long ago on the Bell Farm, something that had a very powerful impact on the Bell family and surrounding community and still holds fascination to this day. I encourage you to check out the links in the show notes and dive a bit deeper into this topic. I would also like to hear your feedback. Please check out twistedstates.com. You'll find a fan mail link there. Share your ideas with me. Tell me what you think. And if you think of any topics you'd like to hear about, let me know there. I'm your host, Reagan. Please throw me a follow at Disruptive Girl on Instagram. Once again, links will be available in the show notes or at twistedstates.com.